everyone, it's Katrina. Today we are diving deep into the ancient world to uncover some of history's most puzzling mysteries. From a massive quarry that seems to be way older than any known civilization, to a mysterious plague that nearly wiped out ancient Athens, there are still things out there that scientists can't explain, at least not yet. So hit that subscribe button and let's take a look. Pre-flood ancient mega quarry. Something wild has been discovered in the American Southwest that was very unexpected. The proof is shocking enough for some experts to start wondering if there wasn't an advanced civilization living in Utah that we never knew about. So what is it? Archaeologists found an ancient quarry. The mysterious quarry can be found just north of Monument Valley, straddling the border of Utah and Arizona. So what is a quarry exactly? Why is it important? A quarry is an open pit mine where stone, rock, sand, gravel, or other materials are extracted from the ground. These materials are often used in construction, manufacturing, and everything else. The enormous stone blocks here look as if they just came out of a brick factory made for giants. The blocks look cut right out of the cliffside. The blocks are unnaturally square, with clear lines marking where they were separated from the nearby cliff. These things are perfect rectangles in some cases. There is no way Mother Nature works in this many straight lines and 90-degree angles, at least according to most people. There are even chunks missing, as if some of the large square blocks were already transported somewhere else. But what's crazy is there is no possible explanation for how they were transported. Even with all the modern technology at our disposal right now, moving these blocks would be next to impossible. While nobody has weighed one, they appear to be upwards of 900 tons. Some are so big they might be double that, perhaps 1,800 tons. Here's where things really get intriguing. I want to draw your attention to a place on the other side of the world, where the biggest stones ever quarried lie silent and forgotten. The Baalbek stones in Lebanon look nearly identical to the huge stone blocks just found in Utah. Not only do they look the same, but they weigh roughly the same too. Plus, scientists can't figure either of them out. There are 6 Baalbek stones in Lebanon, easily recognizable because of their megalithic gigantism. Nowhere else in antiquity can you find quarried stones of this size. The smallest of the 6 are part of a wall in the Temple of Jupiter Baal, built by the Romans. However, it's unclear if the Romans carved the stones themselves or if the stones were already there. It's possible the Romans didn't carve stones at all, but simply reused building blocks crafted by a far more ancient civilization. The 3 smaller stones weigh about 800 tons each, so they're a bit lighter than the stones in Utah. The other 3 are not part of any structure. They're just lying on the ground as if they just fell from nowhere. The biggest of them all is known as the Forgotten Stone. It was only discovered in 2014 by a team of archaeologists at the German Archaeological Institute. It weighs a staggering 1,650 tons and is 64 feet long. It's recognized today as the biggest stone ever quarried. But no one knows how it was cut from the stone and brought to this place or anything else really. There does seem to be a connection between the Baalbek stones and the mysterious blocks found in Utah. But is it truly proof of a pre-flood civilization on our planet? Or at least a civilization we might not know about? Let me know what you think in the comments. The Unsolved Plague of Doom. 2,600 years ago, Greek politician Pericles said to his people, "Put aside your private sorrows and concentrate on securing our common safety." It was a public service announcement in response to a devastating plague that killed an estimated half of Athens' population. This idea of putting the needs of the community above your own needs during times of disease sounds just like what public health officials say today. Some things do stay the same after thousands of years. But what was this mysterious disease that almost wiped out the whole city? Let's take a look at some of the physical symptoms of this plague, just in case any of my lovely viewers have accidentally contracted the mysterious sickness that ravaged Athens. Are any of you feeling feverish in the head, or do you have redness and inflammation of the eyes? According to the Greek chronicler Thucydides, these are the first symptoms to watch out for. Thucydides meticulously recorded the physical symptoms that were being suffered by his fellow Greeks. He himself caught the plague, but miraculously survived. After the fever came the nasty breath. Those who caught the plague had breath like they never brushed their teeth. They also sneezed, became hoarse, coughed blood out of their throat, and grew very sick in their stomach. People were so feverish and thirsty, their thirst was impossible to quench, that they threw themselves into wells, desperate for relief. Modern scientists have speculated that perhaps the Athenian plague was typhoid fever, but they don't know for sure. Scientists have never been able to identify which sickness gripped Athens and wiped out almost the entire city. Things got so bad that people didn't know what was going to happen, and everything started descending into chaos. Thucydides wrote that people started losing respect for laws of God and man alike. People started to fight and kill each other. There was also rampant xenophobia when the plague broke out. There were rumors that it originated in Ethiopia, or that it was the Spartans who had poisoned the Athenian wells. Either way, the people of Athens began lashing out against foreigners. Science may not be able to solve the origin of this horrible plague, but it does seem like humanity hasn't changed that much over 2,000 years. Fairy mummies in a London basement. Winged, tiny humans were found in an ancient basement in London. But that's not all. There was an entire collection of creepy cryptids, and even drawings of Jack the Ripper's victims, Catherine Eddowes and Elizabeth Stride. Who was the maniac with all these drawings and dead creatures, and also jars containing human hearts and other organs? A collection was found that contains bizarre mythical creatures preserved in jars and mummified in ghoulish poses. These cryptid specimens reveal a world of impossibility. But how real are these oddities? The fairies with decayed flesh and wings pinned to display boards like dead moths couldn't have existed. The bodies of extraterrestrials and the strange humanoids with thick coats of fur must be fakes, right? According to rumors, the peculiar items were initially owned by a man named Thomas Theodore Marilyn, an aristocrat biologist of the 19th century. The specimens were supposedly found in his abandoned mansion in London in 1960, just before it was demolished to make room for a residential neighborhood. As workers were clearing the demolition site, they found a secret chamber that had been hidden in the cellar. Inside that chamber were sealed wooden crates, and inside those crates were the fairies, aliens, werewolf bodies, and other freakish artifacts. Unfortunately, I can't tell you for certain if any of this is true or not. The bizarre images of the unimaginable specimens were apparently made by an artist named Alex C.F., but that's not something I can confirm either. If you have any more information, be sure to let us know in the comments. The whole story is weird, as are the little fairies pinned to scientific notebooks like so many preserved beetles. This story could be a hoax, but isn't there some part of you that wants to believe that species like this could exist somewhere? If not in a mysterious London basement, maybe in a secret room of the British Museum, or maybe somewhere deep in the Vatican is a vault that contains the only surviving specimens of the fairies and trolls that used to live on the planet, or at the very least, giants. We gotta have some mystery in this world. And now for a quick break, because it's shoutout time! I want to give a huge thank you to Tarina Browning and Crystal Kitty for supporting this channel. We wouldn't be here without you. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. The Flower of Life at Osiris's Tomb. The Osirion has been called the most mysterious and misunderstood structure in all of Egypt. It's an amazing place, with part of its history known to archaeologists, and the other part of its history a total enigma. And it just got even more mysterious with a new update. The Osirion is connected to the Temple of Seti I in Abydos, but is not technically part of the temple. It's just attached to it, located behind and underneath the temple. The Osirion was found by accident in the early part of the 20th century while archaeologists were excavating Seti's temple. It almost seemed as if Seti had built his temple on top of the Osirion, as if the Osirion came from a much earlier time in Egypt's history. In fact, it almost definitely came from an earlier time in Egyptian history. It was built at a much lower level than Seti's temple, but mainstream researchers claim the Osirion and Seti's temple were built at the same time in the 13th century BC. There are many things happening at this location, but there is something very unique at Seti's temple that I want you to know about. Etched into the soft stone of one of the temple's walls are images of a helicopter, a submarine, and something that's either a spaceship or a zeppelin. These hieroglyphics have been a source of controversy for years. Many believe them to be proof that the ancient Egyptians witnessed advanced technology. Maybe they didn't fly around in their own helicopters, but perhaps they saw them. But who had helicopters 3,300 years ago? That is what the show Ancient Aliens has a field day with. But the logical explanation is that someone superimposed real hieroglyphics so that they would look like these modern vehicles. The vehicles that we see in these pictures are actually parts of different, real hieroglyphics put together. Getting back to the Osirion, it's a tomb without an owner. Egyptologists believe it was built as a symbolic tomb for Osiris, the Egyptian deity of death and resurrection. The truth is that they don't know who built it or when. There are all kinds of other things that don't make any sense when talking about the Osirion. For example, it was built with giant red granite blocks, quarried stones similar to the Baalbek stones, or the strange rectangular rocks found in Utah, though the Osirion stones are smaller, only weighing around 100 tons, which isn't that small. They appear to have come all the way from Aswan, brought from over 100 miles away. Much like other sites in Egypt, the Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple, just to name a few, the size of the blocks is baffling. How did the Egyptians do this without access to advanced technology? There is one more very important aspect of the Osirion that's often completely overlooked. On the surface of a wall at the Osirion are two simplistic markings known as the flower of life symbols. They look simple enough, just ordinary images of swirling flower-like patterns. Only the symbols don't seem to have been carved into the stone. They look as though they've been scorched into the stone, burned into the very atomic structure of the rock. There is no technology the Egyptians could have possibly possessed that allowed them to scorch symbols into the atomic structure of anything. Scientists are left with no logical explanation for how the flower of life symbols came to be on this ancient monument. God is actually AI. What if everything you believe to be real isn't, and everything you thought you knew is a lie? And what if God is an AI ruling over your existence, which, by the way, isn't real either? In other words, you are living in the Matrix and God is a robot. This is a new theory proposed by a physics professor at the University of Portsmouth. Professor Melvin Vopson says God could be an artificial intelligence governing a simulated reality. This isn't just a physicist saying something weird, which I'm sure happens a lot. Melvin has cited the Bible as proof of his incredible theory. He points to a verse in the Gospel of John. It's a verse that even people who haven't read the Bible might be familiar with, and it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Professor Vopson suggests the Word is a reference to a fundamental code driving the simulation that you and I both live in right now. The code represents the simulation and the AI that created and governs the simulation. If you're having some existential dread right now, don't worry, I am too. The implication of this is that a creator intelligence, God, as described by the Bible, made our reality through programming and simulation, and it's possible that ancient people knew about it. This rift in the Matrix could explain some of the stranger things believed by Gnostic Christians, like that the material world is the real hell and that we need to escape it through enlightenment. Professor Vopson made some other interesting points. He compared the laws of physics to a computer code, saying that the fundamental particles of our world are similar to pixels on a digital display. I want to hear your thoughts on this whole situation. Are we nothing but characters in a virtual world? And is the terrifying truth of existence hidden in secret biblical messages or in computer code? An unknown civilization in the Thai jungle. A group of mushroom hunters in Thailand stumbled upon something they had never expected to find, not in a million years. While hiking around in the forest, the mushroom hunters uncovered an ancient sculpture of a woman. It might belong to an unknown civilization. The sculpted woman may also be the Buddha's mother. The sculpture was found by Thai villagers inside the remote Dong Yai Wildlife Sanctuary. This is a dense and lush jungle, the kind of place where if you get lost, you'll likely be eaten by bugs before you ever find your way out. Within this jungle is the ancient sculpture, found partially hidden under trees and foliage. The sculpture is etched into the side of a rock, with no other evidence of anything nearby. What I mean is that there are no temples or structures of any kind. There's nothing but a sculpture of a mysterious woman in the middle of absolutely nowhere. As of right now, scientists are stumped. Officials were sent to investigate, but nobody knows how old the sculpture is or which culture created it. It was discovered near the border of Cambodia, the ancient home of the Khmer Empire, so there might be something to that. Some have suggested the sculpture dates to the Dvaravati era. The Dvaravati was a powerful Southeast Asian kingdom that ruled from the 6th to the 11th century AD. It's possible the sculpture depicts Maya Devi, the Buddha's mother. This could be the beginning of a discovery of an entire lost city. Considering the jungle is so dense, there could be many things hiding there. It could be another Angkor Wat. Hopefully, researchers will break out the LiDAR and start scanning things. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find a lost civilization that no one has even heard of before. The murder mystery of the Huldremos woman. I'd like to introduce you to the Huldremos woman, one of Europe's most mysterious dead bodies. And trust me, Europe has a lot of mysterious dead bodies. Here's a lovely image of the woman taken in 1978. Go ahead and tell me that isn't the greatest picture for her dating profile. In all seriousness, scientists have been trying to get to the bottom of this woman's origin story for years. Her corpse was discovered mummified in a Danish peat bog in 1879. She lived during the Iron Age, though researchers can't say exactly when. She died at some point between 160 BC and 340 AD. If you'd like to meet her in person, you can stop by the National Museum of Denmark to see her remains. The way in which this woman's body was discovered is beyond disturbing. She was found with her legs bent behind her back in an unnatural position. Her right arm was barely attached to her body. Somebody had almost completely severed it prior to death. I should have warned you that things were going to get a little disturbing. Continue listening only if you aren't afraid of losing your lunch. Otherwise, go ahead and fast forward. The Huldremos woman might be an ancient cold case, a murder that needs to be solved even if it happened 2,000 years ago. Archaeologists say one of her legs was broken before she died. Her foot was also brutalized with the same shovel used to dig her grave just before she was thrown into it. As if being beaten with a shovel weren't enough, a rope was found tied around her neck, suggesting that she was either hanged or strangled. Although it's worth mentioning that some archaeologists think the rope was a necklace. Right, a noose for a necklace. I don't know, that seems suspicious. In 1999, scientists conducted a dietary analysis. This revealed that her final meal had been rye bread. Even after all the tests, all the speculation, and all the discoveries, scientists can't paint a clear picture of what happened to the Huldremos woman. She suffered a terrible fate and was buried in a bog. But why? What had she done? Was she sacrificed? Was she a witch, or a murderer, or a vampire? What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments. The Maya Pyramids of the Canary Islands. Did you know that there are pyramids in the Canary Islands in Spain? And did you know that these ancient structures could be linked to Atlantis, Egypt, and Central America? It's not something that many people know, which is crazy because the information is kind of critical to the understanding of all of human civilization. The problem is scientists can't make sense of the pyramids. These things are awesome and make you feel as if you are standing in an ancient Maya ruin somewhere in a Guatemalan jungle. Only these 6 rectangular pyramids are on the island of Tenerife. Scientists have dated them to the 19th century AD. Wait a minute. The pyramids are only 200 years old? That's what scientists have found. They believe the pyramids, which stand about 40 feet tall, were built by relatively modern people. A rural population living on the island constructed a sort of pyramid park out of local stone, though scientists have no idea why. This is one theory to explain the baffling pyramids. Another theory was put forward by famous adventurer Thor Heyerdahl in the 1990s. When he learned about the pyramids of the Canary Islands, he instantly thought about a transatlantic link between Egypt and Central America. Thor became so interested in the history of the pyramids that he moved to the island of Tenerife and started researching parallels. He was trying to connect the Spanish pyramids to other pyramid structures in places like Egypt and Mesoamerica. And this was before YouTube or the internet. He had to do all of this studying in person, with books and pictures and with his own eyes. Even before Thor's move to Tenerife, he was already convinced that the Egyptians had reached the Western world in ancient times. Thor connected the pyramids of Mesoamerica, especially in Mexico and Guatemala, with the pyramids in Egypt. He was of the mind that different cultures were inspired to build similar pyramids because they knew each other. He was convinced that the Egyptians and Maya met and made journeys across the Atlantic to visit each other's kingdoms. They were in a sort of long-distance relationship. Thor theorized that the pyramids in the Canary Islands were part of a geographic stopping point for the voyages between Egypt and Mexico. His theory was, and still is, extremely controversial. He said that since these civilizations were so far away from each other, they needed a place to rest, and that place was the Canary Islands. Naturally, a civilization rose up to facilitate the layovers. This would have been a hybrid civilization, part Maya, part Egyptian. They built their own unique pyramids, 6 of which still survive on Tenerife. But then something unknown happened that caused the journeys across the Atlantic to cease, and slowly the civilization on the Canary Islands disappeared. Which theory do you think makes the most sense? Were these pyramids the result of a secret trading alliance between Egypt and the Maya, or were they built less than 2 centuries ago by a mysterious group of locals? You decide. How old is beer? One of the greatest scientific mysteries that remains unsolved to this day is the age of beer. It may have been the Egyptians. They loved themselves a tart beer. Researchers think Egyptians had beer that tasted kind of lemony, whereas in ancient Greece, they drank a sort of wine-beer mixture of grapes and fermented grains. But who drank it first? That's the question we're going to tackle today, with a little help from Travis Rupp, the beer archaeologist. Travis is an assistant professor who is trying his hardest to reach the deepest roots of beer's history. He has been traveling the world and learning how ancient cultures made beer. He has also been recreating the ancient recipes in a modern beer laboratory, a laboratory that happens to be in his garage. As of the end of September 2024, Travis was in the process of aging 2 different variations of beer mentioned by the ancient Greek poet Homer, the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Homer's beer has an extremely high alcohol content, much higher than modern beer, according to Rupp. The oldest certified evidence of humans brewing beer comes from a cave in Israel. Primitive human beings living inside Rakafet Cave used natural bowls in the cave floor to crush and soak plant starches. They transformed the starches into sugars and then fermented the sugars in containers made from plant fibers. It was a complex operation that may have been going down, wait for it, 13,000 years ago. If you're not shocked, you should be. Beer has been made since before human civilization existed. Beer production might predate agriculture. Take a look at this picture thanks to Danny Nadell. Do you see those little bowl-shaped holes in the ground? Those were the original beer brewing tubs. It was in those holes that the cave dwellers mixed and fermented the earliest known brewskis. Are you feeling a little thirsty yet? The prehistoric cave beer probably didn't taste particularly great. The ancients made their drinks from wild harvested grains and wild fruit. The modern version of beer that Americans are used to drinking didn't come about until the 15th century in Bavaria. Modern beer was created because brewers were trying to avoid paying taxes. Because hops weren't taxed, brewers started flavoring their beers with them more often at the end of the Middle Ages. Then, in 1516, the Bavarian Purity Law was enacted, which defined beer as being made from only 3 ingredients. You had barley, water, and hops. This law is still around and is still shaping the German beer industry to this day. As for the most ancient beer, that's still an unsolved mystery. Yes, people were brewing cave beer in Israel in 11,000 BC, but where did they learn to do it? How did humans know how to brew beer before they knew how to harvest crops? The mystery washed up in a hurricane. A storm-tossed secret from the depths of history has resurfaced. Scientists are still trying to figure out where a canoe came from that washed ashore during Hurricane Irma in 2017. The hurricane struck in early September, and the day after, a historic canoe was found dislodged from the depths of the Indian River. It was sitting on the shore in Coco. The mysterious relic is at least 400 years old, maybe even older. It's 15 feet long and weighs 700 pounds. Even after extensive testing, no one can precisely determine its age. Carla Haddon from the University of Georgia conducted the carbon dating tests, but they were incredibly unreliable. There is only a 50% chance the canoe is from between 1640 and 1680. But what was it doing at the bottom of the Indian River? Here's a figure that's going to surprise you. There have been hundreds of ancient canoes found in Florida, some 7,000 years old. Even though it's unlikely that anyone will properly date the canoe or figure out who built it, there is no doubt that it's a link to the past, to a time when Florida was the home of mysterious cultures who used canoes to get around the waterways in the same way we use cars to get around our highways today. Is this the Hunchback of Notre Dame? You may remember that in 2019, the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris caught fire and was almost completely destroyed. What you may not know is that during the following work to get the ancient cathedral back up and running, archaeologists found an incredible secret far below its floors. This was an incredible discovery, unlike anything historians could have anticipated. 65 feet beneath the floor of the cathedral were 2 lead sarcophagi. The foundation stone of Notre Dame was laid by none other than Pope Alexander III in 1163. It wasn't until 1859 that the famous oak spire towering above the cathedral was revealed to the public. That very spire came crashing down after the 2019 fire. It was directly underneath the spire that the mysterious sarcophagi were found. Inside each one was a human skeleton. One of them was quickly identified thanks to the epitaph on the sarcophagus. The skeleton belonged to Canon Antoine de la Porte, who was a member of the clergy in the 17th century. The other coffin proved significantly more mysterious. It belonged to someone unknown, and this unknown person had a very unusual physical attribute. They weren't hunchback. Instead, their skull was elongated. They had gone through cranial deformation, something you typically expect to find in a Peruvian tomb, not in France. Scientists were at a loss, unable to explain what somebody with an elongated skull was doing buried next to a member of the clergy in the 17th century. But now the pieces are starting to fall into place. Recent investigations by the University of Toulouse identified the skeleton as that of Joachim du Bellay. Studying his skeleton revealed that he died of chronic tuberculosis meningitis in the 16th century. It's believed he was around 40 years old at the time. He was also a poet and a distinguished horseman. But what's the deal with the elongated skull? When Joachim du Bellay was a baby, he likely had a tight cloth band tied around his skull for a full 3 months, and this changed the way his head grew. As for the why, let's try to figure it out. The most famous elongated skulls are from the Paracas culture in Peru. The Paracas culture thrived between 750 BC and 100 AD. That was more than 1,000 years before the foundation was laid for Notre Dame. You might be wondering how an ancient Peruvian practice made it to France. Scientists would like to know the same thing, but they're puzzled. No one has ever been able to figure out how this strange custom made it around the world. Elongated skulls have been found in Scandinavia, the Middle East, and in random pockets throughout Asia. And of course, at Notre Dame. It's unclear how the practice reached France, but it did. Here's something that few people know. Your friends might not even believe you when you tell them. Up until the 20th century, less than 100 years ago, people in France practiced cranial deformation. Though not everyone, it was specifically in the region of Ducève, in the west of France. Having an elongated skull was considered a symbol of power among the elite. Sometimes poor families would modify the skulls of their children as an attempt to cheat them into the higher social classes. Du Bellay came from the top tier of French society in the 16th century. That's why he had an elongated skull, although it's still a mystery how he ended up underneath Notre Dame's spire. The bigger mystery is trying to come up with a reason why so many different cultures were obsessed with making their skulls long. It almost always had something to do with elevating social status. So where do you think the origin of elongated skulls came from? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching!
Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
Fear of the Walking Dead. Anyone who has a deep-rooted fear of zombies would never make it a day in ancient Greece. The Greeks were unbelievably obsessed with the living dead, even though these are the very people who gave us some of the most logical minds and rational thinkers. They were all quite hysterically nonsensical when it came to zombies. And yes, we have evidence of it. Archaeologists have uncovered multiple instances of ancient Greeks burying people in such a way that they can never rise from the dead. They would weigh them down with rocks, pile their corpses with fragments of pottery, whatever they thought would work to keep the body pinned inside its tomb. The Greeks feared that if they didn't do this, certain dead individuals would rise from their grave and terrorize the living. Dr. Carrie Sulowski-Weaver from the University of Pittsburgh says the Greeks are an excellent example of an ancient culture that embraced the supernatural. They truly did believe that corpses could become reanimated, but they didn't think of zombies as roaming across the world in great hordes and wiping out civilization. Instead, zombies to the Greeks were agents of death. They were thought to slink through the shadows to prey on unsuspecting victims, usually as revenge for something that happened in life. Necrophobia, a fear of the dead, was very much present in ancient Greece. Naked at the gym. The ancient Greeks loved to hit the gym. In Athens, over 2,000 years ago, the people were just as enthusiastic about getting into shape as people are today, maybe even more so. But there was one thing about going to the gym in Greece back then that would not be politically correct these days. First of all, the gym wasn't always just about working out. According to Eric Chalene, who wrote a book on the history of gyms, the gym was a place for artists and the political. The enlightened Greek could go to the gym and discuss life, culture, and the gods with his fellow enlightened friends. While all this was going on, the men were completely naked. The word gymnasium translates to school for naked exercise. Yes, I'm serious. There wasn't anything weird about this to the Greeks. They had a special kind of admiration for the naked human body and preferred to practice sports and stay in shape without any clothes on. They were positively obsessed with the male form and would prance around in the nude with all their pals in open-air gymnasiums without a care in the world. But the free spirit of the Greeks would die with the Romans and be ripped apart by the Middle Ages. The Romans didn't believe it was good to obsess over the body or one's physical appearance. They also didn't like how the Greeks were so willing to satiate their physical desires. As Christianity took hold, by the Middle Ages, the body became a thing to be feared, a toxic thing used only for immoral pleasures. Even in modern days, we are a long way off from openly naked gyms like the Greeks. Heraclitus and the cow's dung. Heraclitus of Ephesus was a Greek philosopher in the 6th century BC. He was an arrogant man, allegedly an influence of both Plato and Aristotle, and was famous for presenting his best ideas in the form of riddles. Fun, right? But Heraclitus, as the years went on, became a little deranged and a little lost in his philosophy. He started to hate other people's company, then retreated into the mountains like a hermit. While living out his final days as a crazy old man in the mountains, Heraclitus began to suffer from a mysterious ailment. He suffered from an accumulation of fluid in the body. Unsure exactly how to treat it, he decided to cover himself completely in cow dung. The idea was that the heat from the dung would make the fluid inside his body evaporate. What Heraclitus didn't count on was that he would get trapped in the pile of dung as if he'd stepped into quicksand. Stuck, completely helpless, and up to his neck in cow dung, Heraclitus was then attacked by some stray dogs and killed. He tried to fix his own sickness and instead was eaten by dogs. It's important to note that this may not be historically accurate. Nobody can say for certain how the famous philosopher died. Some scholars say the whole story about him dying from fluid accumulation was an ironic twist on his teachings, something about the death of the soul when it turns into water. Either way, ancient Greeks had some strange ideas about medicine and cow dung. Spartan training. Sparta was a Greek city-state. In ancient Greece, the country was made up of many individual city-states, none subservient to the other. Athens was its own city-state, and so was Sparta. But Sparta was vastly different from Athens. Whereas their Athenian neighbors were busying themselves with politics and philosophy, the Spartans were busy training warriors. It was thanks to the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC that the Persians never conquered Greece, and that battle was only a handful of Spartans against the vastly superior Persian army. Many of the Greek city-states had perfectly fine armies, but Sparta's army was recognized as being the best. They achieved this greatness because of their education and training systems. They used harsh and often cruel methods to prepare young Spartan boys to grow up to be good citizens and ruthless soldiers. It was called the agoge or the agoge, and it's hard to imagine 7-year-olds today going through such a violent and exhausting trial. Parents these days would see it as a traumatic and frightening experience, but it was what made Sparta great. According to the Greek historian Plutarch, Spartans began to develop their soldiers immediately after birth. Male infants would be evaluated by elders, and only those considered sturdy were allowed to live. The rest were deemed unfit to be Spartans and were left at the foot of a mountain to perish. At the age of 7, the boys were turned over to the state. It was like boot camp where the boys lived and trained together. They studied, fought each other, and the most skilled soon became captain and was able to give orders. Through their training and education, Spartan boys turned into men who could endure more than any other Greek. They were also dedicated to Sparta, and this upbringing resulted in one of the most stable political entities in world history. Sparta's politics never floundered because everyone grew up with a strict sense of community and cooperation. Sparta only fell when they were forced to join the rest of Greece after they got ganged up on in 192 BC. Well babies. Sadly, Spartans weren't the only ones in ancient Greece who threw away unwanted babies. In ancient Athens, it was totally normal for somebody to throw a human infant down a well if they died shortly after birth. Back then, it was seen as nothing more than throwing something away. It's pretty horrific, but the Greeks didn't see anything wrong with it. Evidence of this terrifying practice was discovered in the 1930s. Archaeologists excavated the Athenian Agora marketplace in the city center. They found all kinds of buried temples, fantastic statues, and a mysterious well carved into the rock. They were hoping to find more statues and relics at the bottom of the well, but instead came across 450 infant skeletons. At first, the experts couldn't fathom the idea of throwing away babies. They believed there had been some kind of mass sickness that wiped out hundreds of infants. It wasn't until later that researchers agreed the well had been a garbage dump for the recently deceased. The thing is that in Greek society, nobody was considered a real person until about 10 days after their birth, when they had a special ceremony. And so, if a baby died due to natural causes after being born, they were almost never buried properly or even grieved for. They would just be tossed down the local well or left at the dump. Sacrificed to Zeus. The ancient Greeks may have done a little more human sacrifice than previously believed. We know the Aztec, the Inca, and the Maya were all fans of sacrificial rituals, but it's not really something that turns up in Greek history. However, a recent discovery on Mount Lycaon is changing our whole perspective on Greek sacrifice. The cold remains of a male teenager were found at the mountaintop, a spot which we know was popular with worshippers of the god Zeus. It was at the top of this mountain where an ash altar was erected to Zeus, the god of gods. The altar was excavated in 2006, but no human remains were initially found. Those didn't come until much later. Now researchers are wondering just how many other sites in ancient Greece were used for the ritual killing of a person. It could be that the Greeks were a lot more bloodthirsty than anyone ever imagined. Flat stone toilet paper. If you've ever wondered what it was like living in ancient Greece, replace your toilet paper with a broken dish from your cupboard and you'll have your answer. According to French anthropologist Philippe Charlier's new study on toilet hygiene in the classical era, the Greeks used flat stones or pieces of ceramic to clean their bottoms. The theory is based on small discs found near ancient latrines with residue still stuck to them from thousands of years ago. There are also images on ancient Greek cups that appear to show people using such stones to wipe their behinds. This is quite different from what the Romans did with their public bathrooms. They used something called a tersorium, which was a sponge tied to a long stick. People would use it to clean themselves, with dozens of people all sharing the same stick. They would give it a brief rinse with vinegar water or salt water, then pass it on to their neighbor. The Greeks went in a totally different direction with their toilet etiquette. They used rocks to scrape away unwanted residue instead of a comfortable soft sponge. The mellified man. Soaking a human cadaver in honey was widely practiced in China in the 16th century. It's called mellification, and it was a way for old people to donate their body to science. The idea supposedly came from an Arabic recipe, a very old tradition in which a recently dead person would have their body transformed into medicine. The process was gruesome at best and involved turning a human body into a mummified candy bar. To make things even more gruesome, to yield the best results, the mellification process typically started while the individual was still alive. The person would eat nothing but honey as they reached their final days. They would even bathe in the honey, and before long, honey accumulated inside the body, and then the person died. After their death, they would be buried in a stone coffin filled to the brim with honey. The coffin was then closed for about 100 years. The honey would preserve the body and turn it into a sugary glob of confection. Then the mummified human candy apple was cut into pieces and sold at markets as medicine. People used this stuff to treat wounds, bone fractures, sicknesses, and even ate it as a treat. And although this was most popular in China in the 16th century, it started way before that in ancient Assyria, and it may have been practiced by the Greeks as well. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote of the practice in the 4th century BC. There were also rumors that Alexander the Great was buried in a honey-filled sarcophagus. Kicking out the politicians. If you didn't like a politician in ancient Greece, you could get together with your friends and vote to have them ostracized. Ancient Greek democracy was such a new and exciting thing that if the public hated a politician enough, they could have them banned from Greece forever. This was popular for a brief moment in time. From between 487 and 416 BC, Athenians were encouraged to banish whoever they wanted without a trial. It was the opposite of a popularity contest. And according to historian James Sickinger from Florida State University, its origins were completely humble. In order to prevent any tyrants from taking root in the democratic system, Greeks were given the power to kick out unwanted politicians. The historical records from ancient Greece show that it happened at least a dozen times. A candidate only needed roughly 6,000 votes cast against them. This was considered enough hate in Athenian democracy for a politician to be ostracized. The issue became that Athenians could not agree on anything. If even just a small group hated what one politician was doing, they could have that person kicked off the team. It became a major problem because after almost a century, nothing was getting done. Nobody could agree on what the right course was, and so ancient Greece had to change their system to something a little more like what we have today. Not worth his salt. Ancient Greece was not nearly as civilized as many people think. One major aspect of Greek society that nobody wants to talk about is the fact that they practiced slave trading. Slaves were a major part of Greek culture, just as they were with the Romans. It was perfectly acceptable in ancient Greece to purchase human beings from foreign states and treat them as livestock. Even more disturbing is just how the Greeks would pay for their slaves. One of the most popular payment methods was salt. Because salt was such a scarce commodity, it could be used for everything from paying a soldier for their work to purchasing another human being. The expression, "not worth his salt," came from ancient Greek slave markets when people refused to pay salt for an individual they viewed as undesirable. Thanks for watching! Do you think you could have survived in ancient Greece? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye!